From Bartholomeus Anglicus on the Properties of Things, translated by John Trevisa. Chapter 2. First, it is important to know what kind of thing the soul is, its disposition, its etymological meaning, and the establishment of this name, anima, a soul. Then to learn of its power and virtue, and thirdly of its actions and operations. The fourth thing to learn is of the perfect state of the soul and how it may be compared, that is to know what its properties are when it is joined to the body, and when it separates from the body. The reasonable soul that we will speak of is defined by some saints and philosophers as a spirit, by some as a soul, and by some others as anima et spiritus, soul and spirit. Augustine, in his book of the movement of the heart, defines it as that which has the nature of a spirit. Chapter 3. The soul is a bodiless intellectual substance that receives light from the first by the last relation. By this definition we can know the first and highest property of the soul, for man's spirit receives the light of God next after angels. Also, in that it is a soul, it is defined in two ways. First, it is joined to the body in two senses. That means as the mover is to the thing that is moved, and also as a shipman is joined to the ship. And according to this, Remigius defines a soul in the following way. A soul is a bodiless substance ruling a body. And Augustine, on the soul and spirit in this manner, a soul is a certain substance, partner of reason, assigned to a body that shall be ruled. Of this definition the following property can be taken, that is, that the soul is by a certain necessity of love and governance naturally given to rule the body that it is joined to, and hereby it appears that the soul is not straitened, neither is it spread out in length nor in breadth in the body that it governs and rules, but by virtue of the soul the body is ruled and moved about. As Chalcidius exemplifies in his commentary on Plato's Timaeus, like the spider that sits in the middle of the web and feels all manner of movement that touches the web within or without it, so the soul, dwelling in the middle of the heart, gives life to all the body and governs and rules the movement of all the limbs without spreading itself throughout the body. In the way in which it activates the body that it is joined to as form and perfection, the soul is defined by the philosopher Aristotle in the Book of the Soul in this manner. A soul is endelicia, that is, the first act or perfection of a natural body that has limbs and the power to possess life. By this definition it is manifest that the soul be joined to a body. It may not be joined to any body, but only to a natural body that has limbs and is first naturally disposed to receive a reasonable soul. Also, in the sense that it is a soul and spirit, it is defined in four kinds of ways. First, in comparison to creatures generally, as Augustine says in the Book of the Soul and Spirit, in this way. A soul is made in the likeness of all wisdom, and bears in itself the likeness of all things. For it is connected by feeling to the earth, by imagination to water, by reason to air, by intellect to the firmament, by knowledge to heavenly joys. In the sixth manner, it is described in comparison to God as to his Maker, thus: a soul is like to God, a breath of life. In this way we know that the soul is not begotten of the father and mother, but is given by God to make the body live. Also in the seventh manner it is described in comparison to God as to the end for which it is made. Thus a soul is an intelligent spirit, ordained to bliss in itself and to brightness in the body. In this shines another property of the soul, that the soul departed from the body is not only beautified with angels, or as an angel is, but the joy is enlarged and the spiritual body glorified. John of Damascene, in chapter 24 of his homilies, comprehends all these definitions under a general description, and says that the soul is a substance living and bodiless in his own nature, invisible to bodily eyes, immortal, rational, intellectual, without human shape. And it uses a body and gives to it the heart of life and of growing and begetting, and has no other understanding, but in itself is more pure. Also, as the eye is in the body, so is the intellect, understanding, in the soul. And it has the capacity to make decisions and free will and changeable by appropriate force, for it may freely agree or refuse. All these the Spirit receives of God's grace that made it and gave it being in nature. Hereto speaks John Damascene. St. Bernard equally describes such properties and says, O thou soul, beautified and made fair with the image and likeness of God, espoused in spirit with faith, brought with Christ's blood to achieve salvation and healing, partner of reason, what have you to do with the flesh by which you suffer much? By these many and diverse definitions and descriptions, many properties of the soul are known, concerning its being in nature and of grace. Chapter 24. But what kind of thing a soul is unknown to many men. For in this matter we read that philosophers of old gave diverse and contradictory judgment. In the Book of the Soul, Aristotle repeats what Plato says, that a soul is a being that moves itself, and Zeno says that a soul is a number that moves itself. Pythagoras calls the soul harmony, a concord of melody, and Paphnons calls it idea, a kind of example, and Alcibiades calls it a kind of agreement that makes the five wits work. Hippocrates calls it a subtle spirit that is spread throughout the whole body. Heraclius the philosopher calls the soul a light or a sparkle of being. Democritus calls it an unknowable spirit, atmos, a little thing like to the motes in a sunbeam, and so he concludes that the body of the soul is such a little thing. Parmenides says the soul is made of earth and of fire. Epicurus defines its nature as made of fire and air. Impetus calls it a fiery strength, according to which their heavenly origin is a fiery energy. Since so many wise men have spoken in so many varied ways of the soul, and from this time only it shall suffice to say that holy men say the soul is a kind of spiritual and rational substance that God made out of nothing to give life to man's body and for the chance to attain spiritual perfection.